Okay, today I want to talk about the pelvic floor. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to start the women's group, was because I actually think that's a pretty big subject. So pelvic floor issues for women, as in peeing during double unders or box jump or barbell squat, that's been around forever. It's always been a problem, but I think this is something, first of all, that women did not want to talk about too much. For example, I didn't know about it until CrossFit, until suddenly during intense exercise I saw that issue popping up more and more and more and more, and suddenly I was like, really, that's a common issue actually. So then it came about, but I do think the problem is getting worse, and I will explain. By the way, this is not only a women issue. All men have a genetic weakness in the lower abs, right? And we saw that with hernia. Like I had one, so I had surgery on that when I was like 26, 27. And the doctor that I saw, the surgeon, told me like it's actually very common, and for most men it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when. So for example, I had the problem, hernia basically is we have a hole on both sides where the abdominal muscle do not close completely, right? And then that hole keeps opening, and eventually fat seeps through, and then eventually the organ, and then that's what the hernia is. And he said actually that hole was leaking fat through for like 10 years before it eventually turned into something he had to have surgery on. So it's actually, I think the lower ab issue, like that pelvic floor, is actually a common for men and women. We just don't address it. And so, but I do think the problem is getting worse, and I'm going to explain why. So at first, that pelvic floor was talked about mostly with women who had kids, right? 40s, 50s. And that's why we saw that issue happening. And then in CrossFit, since we had ladies in their 40s starting to train intensely, which was not something we saw that often before, then we started to see that that problem popping up more often. But now we're starting, it's not just ladies in their 40s and 50s who had kids. Now we're talking 20-year-olds, right? Very strong, athletic. We saw it at the CrossFit Games. 20-year-old, very athletic, very strong. So young women who cannot go through an intense exercise without peeing, without having those issues. And now, so I started seeing that. I was like, okay, so that's starting to be, I think it's the symptoms of a serious issue, let's put it this way, right? So I started to ask around, and then I heard that, yeah, at most gym, it's a common thing. And then more and more now, I'm hearing women talking about like uterus prolapse and things like this. So that's far more scary, the prolapse, because now you're talking surgery, and then they say, oh, it's fine after surgery. Yeah, but that's still a major surgery. It shows that there's an issue there. And I think one of the big issues with the pelvic floor problem is being made worse by overusing external torque. So I would explain. So if you're aware with my work toward external torque, internal torque, and if you're not, please go see my videos, because otherwise it won't necessarily make sense, is that external torque targets the rectus abdominis, the six-pack, right? And then at the same time, since we have two kinetic chains, one for external torque, one for internal torque, right? The external torque targets the six-pack and also the lumbar spine. So it's basically they reinforce each other, right? See that as two sides that work together, the six-pack and the lumbar spine. By that I mean the erectors along the lumbar spine. So as one gets stronger, so is the other. So basically developing that six-pack allows for the lumbar spine to flex harder, and this is why you see the arching more and more and more pronounced amongst the game athletes. And if you see the female athletes at the games, you'll see that arch, and you'll see the six-pack getting thicker and thicker and thicker, right? But not the waist, not the external obliques, which makes, by the way, for a great look. I think the CrossFitters are the most athletic, gorgeous women out there, there's no question. But you can see that in the last 5 years, the six-pack has getting thicker and thicker and thicker, which leads to performance on certain lifts. And again, to me, it looks awesome. But the fact is, as external torque has gotten stronger, let's say, we have not balanced that by the internal torque getting stronger as well. So that means now the arch, which is on one side external torque and internal torque on the other to keep everything balanced, right, is starting to have an issue. So the arch is starting to collapse one way because we are working toward external torque, but not enough toward internal torque. like as most of you well know, you've been taught to do external torque on the squat, external torque on the deadlift, and all that can lead to a problem. On the squat, internal torque should be used on the way down and out of the hole, and on the deadlift, you should be always deadlift in internal torque. So that means that you have developed all the muscles toward external torque. That's the six-pack. That's the erectors on the lumbar spine, right? So all that is creating all that tension there, which is great, but that tension is pushing down also, right? It's creating all the strength there. What you have not done, or not, sorry, maybe not all of you, but for a mass majority, what has not been done is strengthening internal torque. Internal torque means external obliques, means transverse, means low abs. Basically the pelvic floor. So what we have seen is that there's too much work that has been done around the rectus abdominis and not enough with the pelvic floor. So that means if you combine all this, greater performance, more weight on your back, greater external torque, but without that internal torque being built, that means it's furthering the issue of the pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor is not stronger than it was before, but everything else is. So it's pushing down, the weight is pushing down, you are using your rectus abdominis too much, and your external obliques and transverse and low abs not enough. So the combination of the two, I think, is making those pelvic floor issues worse, and I am afraid that it will lead to, for example, more cases of the prolapse of the uterus. If that were to happen, we might as well close the door, because that'll close out every CrossFit gyms out there, right? So but the good news is there are ways to fix this, and so the best way that I've found to fix that, because there's a lot of people that do work toward the pelvic floor, but the problem with those exercises is the second it works at first, but the second you go toward intensity or toward more weight on your back, there is no progression in those exercises to make you stronger so that you can handle more weight, right? And so I came up with an exercise that is called the External Oblique Opener, right? And then the variation, the leg raises, and then the T-spine opener that are designed to strengthen, transform the external obliques and the transverse. But and then obviously the low abs, since they're all connected. What I discovered though, and that's not why I created it for, but I did discover that it helps tremendously strengthening the pelvic floor, which after the fact makes a lot of sense. But at the time I was just looking for an exercise for the obliques. But of course, the obliques, and transverse, and low abs are one package, one unit. And so when you train the external obliques opener, right, you're also going to strengthen the pelvic floor. And so is that working? Yes, because I tested it on some of my athletes, and it was very interesting, because I would do the external obliques, I would put the kettlebell below the belly button, and right away the flow would stop, right, laying on the floor. But if I put the kettlebell on top of the belly button, ask them to push up, engaging the rectus abdominis and the lumbar spine, I found that they started, basically they could not control the flow, and they feel they were peeing themselves. Put the kettlebell below the belly button, stops everything is strong, because now you're in hollow position, everything is controlled. Back on top of the button, and then the flow kept going. So that tells me that the whole problem with the pelvic floor, as in like in the sense of peeing and stuff like that, happens into that external torque. So if we can compensate, I'm not saying not to do external torque, we should always do that, but I'm saying we need to balance that with the internal torque and strengthening the muscle that is part of the main arch for the internal torque, which is external obliques, transverse, and low abs. So I will link the YouTube videos on the comments to our external obliques opener, but trust me, do that exercise every day, right? 2 sets of 60 seconds every day for 6 weeks, and you will see a major difference already into the strengthening of the pelvic floor. And I tried that on 2 game athletes, young, right? One I had kids, the other one didn't. And I can tell you that the youngest one, who was the most, is very, very athletic, no kids, only in her early 20s, could not do the external obliques opener at all. Like, she could not push the kettlebell up. She had no control of the transverse and the low abs. And this is an athlete who ends up peeing a lot during like heavy squats and stuff like that. So I do think that those external obliques, transverse, low abs, so through the obliques opener, will be the key to strengthening the pelvic floor. Obviously, there are many other exercises than some PTs will give you, but I think those will allow you to strengthen the muscle necessary to keep everything connected for the heavy squats, heavy deadlift, and and all that intense exercise. You should still do all the other exercise, but that would be, to me, the progression toward strengthening the muscle for lifting, if that makes sense. Okay? Any question that you have, put it in the comments and I'll answer. Okay? Thank you, everyone.